This is what I'm looking for in the next head coach of Penn State. Firing your head coach, you're already behind the eight ball on recruiting. An offensive-minded head coach that's under 40 that is trending in the right direction. Another name that keeps getting thrown around is Urban Meyer. I don't want him. Fifth on my list, Manny Diaz, the current head coach at Duke. Number 4, I have Will Stein. He can run an offense. Kenny Dillingham comes in at 3, a guy that's having success that could potentially be playing in a college football playoff. Number 2 on my list, Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator, Joe Brady. This is an interesting one. All right, for my number 1 head coaching option for the Penn State Nittany Lions, it is Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Road to Happy Valley. I'm your host, Noah Malone. So, on today's episode, I want to just talk about the head coaching search for Penn State, talk about the list that was shared the other week, talk about some candidates who I think are off the board, and then kind of go through a little bit of background about all the guys that I would like to be the next head coach of Penn State, the criteria that I'm looking for with whoever that next head coach may be. So before I get into any of that, I want to take a second and almost just look at what's been going on around Penn State. And what I mean by that is we haven't had a different head coach in over a decade. So for me, and I know for a lot of other Penn State fans out there, this is a completely new experience. I know that James Franklin has been the Penn State head coach for more than a third of my life. And I'm sure that's similar to a lot of other people out there. Penn State is not a place where they just filter through new head coaches year in and year out. So this is uncharted waters for a lot of us, and I just kind of want to talk about all of that. So like there's a lot of different emotions and things that me and I'm sure a bunch of you out there feel as we kind of go through this head coaching search and as we carry on through the season. But for me, I look at it as a couple things. This is an extremely exciting opportunity for Penn State to take that next step and to become hopefully one of the elite programs in the country. And I think that finding that right guy is all that this athletic department really cares about. And I trust them. I trust that they'll find the right guy. But as fans, like, this is exciting. There is a part of me that feels like, okay, wow, this is great. This is a clean slate. This is a fresh start. Like, finding what the future of Penn State could look like can be exciting. But on the flip side of that too, there's always that little thought that creeps into my mind that's like, all right, what are we getting ourselves into here? Because we did just fire a head coach that has been pretty successful for us, but at the same time, we're allowed to sit here as fans and want more than that. We're allowed to sit here as alumni and want more and want to take that next step as a college football program. So I think that that's probably a lot of how a lot of you guys feel, if I had to guess. It's exciting, it's scary, but at the end of the day, I trust this athletic department to make the right call and to hire the right guy. So just wanted to touch on that for a little bit, but moving into the next portion of this is I want to rule out a couple guys that I don't necessarily want as head coach, and I don't think they would be interested in being a head coach at Penn State. Obviously, one of the names that was tossed around at the beginning of this was Kurt Signetti. He is obviously off the board. He signed an extension with Indiana, well deserved. He has been phenomenal for them. Um, Another name that keeps getting thrown around is Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer is currently on set with Fox. He does Big Noon. He does all of that. I don't necessarily know if he is realistically interested in coming back and being a head coach somewhere, but um, I don't want him as the next head coach of Penn State. He's been out of the game for a little while. That's not necessarily why. I think he would still be a successful coach, but I'm looking for almost that new youthful movement in the next head coach of Penn State. I want a guy that is going to be there for a handful of years, that is a little bit younger, that is somebody that is going to build alongside of Penn State. And I just don't know that uh, Urban Meyer is somebody that is going to be coaching, if he does jump back into it, for a long period of time. And that kind of goes into the next guy with Nick Saban. He's pretty much come out and said that he doesn't want the head coaching job at Penn State either, which, if I had to choose between one of them, I'd rather have Nick Saban than Urban Meyer. But um, again, he pretty much fits the same criteria um, that Urban Meyer is in, where you don't really know how much longer they'd be coaching. They say they were to come back in, you'd get 3 years, and it's like, yeah, you'd be one of the best programs probably in the country for that short span, but I'm looking for more long term than just this near future. And I think you're more likely to find that in a younger option. Next, I had Lane Kiffin on here. Um, I don't think he's going to be a guy that Penn State's targeting, and I think that's pretty much what we've seen. Um, on a lot of social media. Ole Miss is really good. Would he be a great head coach to go to Happy Valley? Yes, but based off of Lane's personality and whatnot, it just seems like he's meant to be an SEC coach, and I think that's where he'll ultimately stay. There has been conversations of him going to Florida after their head coaching job just opened up, but realistically, who knows? Again, I don't really see him leaving the SEC. Another guy that was initially brought up was Marcus Freeman. I have a very hard time seeing him leave Notre Dame. He's done a phenomenal job there as well. They are giving him basically whatever he wants as far as uh, money, as far as resources, the whole 9 yards. Um, I feel like that's a very difficult head coach that it would be a very difficult situation to pry a guy like him away from the amount of success that he's had at Notre Dame in a short um, period of time. So that's a few guys. I will say this too: the time frame of finding a new head coach plus the recent amount of head coaching jobs that have become open is something just to keep an eye on. Of course, the year that Penn State moves on from their head coach, it seems like a lot of other big name programs are moving on from theirs as well. So we'll see what happens. I will say that I would love for them to be able to find a head coach and have that announced by the beginning of December before the holiday. There's a few reasons why. I will touch on those. It kind of falls into the characteristics of what I'm looking for in the next head coach. But yeah, obviously the sooner the better. But at the same time, I don't want them to rush this process. This is the biggest decision that Pat Kraft and this athletic department is going to have to make, potentially in their tenure. Moving on from Franklin was already a massive, massive decision, especially at the point of the season in which they did it. But making sure that they knock this hire out of the park is incredibly important, and it will shape the entire future for Penn State moving forward. So This is an extremely difficult decision, um, and it's going to have massive uh, roles in how Penn State football looks for the foreseeable future. But I trust them. I think they're going to make the right decision. So, getting into it, this is what I'm looking for in the next head coach of Penn State. Number one, I want them to be an offensive minded head coach. One of the biggest issues that I have noticed, and I'm sure a bunch of you have too, is the quarterback development and similarly the wide receiver development. Now, there's been more success in the wide receiver room previously, but as of recent, that has been an area of weakness for Penn State. They just have not been able to develop these guys and put a high quality product out on the field at wide receiver since there has been some that Franklin has had, but it's been few and far between. And I will say it's not the recruiting aspect of it either. They're bringing in some high quality guys, some high star, 4-star guys that certainly are talented, but the development standpoint in the wide receiver room hasn't been there. And ultimately, the same thing in the quarterback room. Drew Aller, 5-star guy, hasn't really developed how a lot of us would have hoped. Sean Clifford was a 4-star guy. He was pretty consistently good throughout his time at Penn State, but it never felt like he took that next step. And then even before him, Trace McSorley, it kind of felt like the level that those guys were playing at was just the level that they were always going to reach. And I want this offense to take the next step and to become one of the elite offenses in college football. And they have the guys. They're clearly able to bring in the talent. They have the 5-star. They have the 4-star guys on the offensive side of the ball. It's just a matter of being able to develop that talent and then being able to get them uh, to play at the level that they're capable of in between the lines. So uh, I really think that that's super important. I want that to be a priority for this athletic department moving forward. I want it to be an offensive minded guy. And additionally, I think just to kind of chime back on that, I think one of the biggest things that has held back Penn State from taking that leap has been at the quarterback position and at the wide receiver position. Their offensive line's been solid. Running back room has been consistently very good. Tight ends, that speaks for itself. But where Penn State has been lacking has been at wide receiver and quarterback play. And I think if they can get that figured out, I think that they will be able to take that next step and become an elite team in college football, an elite program for that matter. But yeah, offensive minded is my first criteria. Second, this person has to be an elite recruiter. We've been seeing it left and right on social media that the guys in the 2026 class have been decommitting, and I totally get it. If you're a high school kid and the place that you're committed to fires their head coach, there's uncertainty around the program. Um, it's very understandable for you to ultimately make that decision for what's ever best for you and for your future and to begin to look elsewhere. And this isn't something that's uncommon. As long as coaches are getting fired, there will be kids in those classes that decommit. That's just part of college football. And I think even more so now with the NIL, that just puts a whole nother loop into it. But this next person has to be an elite recruiter because we've already had a lot of the 2026 class decommit. There are still a handful of guys that are committed, so hats off to them. Hopefully, the current guys, Terry Smith and the current recruiters, can keep those guys together and begin to hopefully shape this 2026 and begin working on 2027. But um, being an elite recruiter is going to be a crucial part of the next steps for Penn State football and for the future. They're going to have to be elite at getting in the portal as well because there's likely going to be guys at Penn State that head elsewhere at the end of this season that enter the transfer portal. And again, that is totally fine. That's just part of the game when you move on from your head coach. Um, Third, this isn't. Um, I would say that this isn't the end all be all, but I talked about this at the beginning. I want somebody that is on the younger side, somebody preferably under 40, um, because I want them to be able to be at Penn State for a long time. That is something that Penn State has historically been. It's you're at Penn, you're the head coach at Penn State. You're having success. They keep you around. Um, so ideally, I'd like somebody to be on the younger side, but if not, not necessarily the end of the world for me. Next, some level of proven success, um, even if it's not as a head coach. So, what I mean by that is an offensive coordinator, a defensive coordinator, where you're on a championship team, maybe a team that you played for or that you coached for, excuse me, won a national championship, or you are putting together an offensive or defensive group that is one of the best in the country. Something along those lines that leads me to believe that you can put together one at least one side of the ball that uh, can be an elite unit, and that kind of goes hand in hand with the offensive side of it because I think that Penn State has consistently been really great defensively. Now, you may disagree with me for this season, and you would probably be right. But historically, they've been a great defense. But like I said, I'm looking for this to be somebody on the offensive side of things. So, in a nutshell, my ideal candidate would be an offensive minded head coach that's under 40 that is bringing almost it doesn't even necessarily have to be like a big name program. It can just be a program that um, might not have had a ton of success but has them trending in the right direction, and has that capability of being a good recruiter and leading a program too. So it doesn't have to be a head coach, but I do want some level of proven success. I would prefer someone under 40 that is an elite recruiter that is an offensive minded head coach. All right. Now heading in to my head coaches list. If you didn't see it already, you can find it on the state media Instagram. Um, Take a look at that. Make sure you follow. All right. Descending order. So, fifth on my list, a lot of you are familiar with him already. Manny Diaz, the current head coach at Duke. So, right off the bat, I know that Manny does not fit into two of the four characteristics that I'm looking for, but he is a familiar face to Penn State, which I think plays well for the boosters and for the alumni from an NIL perspective. Is those groups of people tend to favorite the Penn State connections, and rightfully so, right? Like you want a guy that has some tie to Penn State. I fully understand that. That's not necessarily a huge criteria for me, but I fully understand it, and I think that it only plays well for whoever that next head coach is going to be. But anyways, back to Manny. He was an elite defensive coordinator in his time here at Penn State in 2023. He had those boys flying around, and it was one of the best units in the country. Um, he brings a type of energy that I think is extremely important um, to a university, to a program. It kind of seemed like that energy that Franklin had when he first got here is what Manny Diaz has all of the time. Um, I think some of the red flags and some of the drawbacks are um, his record in big games, and I think that's totally fair. What I will say though is at his time at Miami and his time at Temple and his time, excuse me, not Temple, at his time at Miami and his time at Duke, he didn't have the resources that he's going to have as the head coach of Penn State. Um, the record against the ranked teams not great. Overall record as a head coach though, 34-22, and that spans over 3 years at Miami and 2 years at Duke. Um, I'll tell you why this doesn't necessarily concern me. Duke is a basketball school. This kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about the resources. But yeah, Duke's a basketball school. The resources that he's going to have as the head coach at Penn State are going to immensely outweigh the resources that he had as the head coach at Duke. So I think that's something to take into account. Um, a lot of these guys are going to have tons of resources. The world is going to be theirs, basically, is kind of what it seems like these last couple years at Penn State. Is a lot more money's been dedicated to football, a lot more money, and we've seen it. They spent a lot of money to get this last class to come back and to play when a lot of those guys could have gone to the draft and taken that next step. And on top of that, they're spending a boatload of money to renovate the stadium. So they're all hands on deck here at Penn State for the football program. Um, Another thing that doesn't concern me, which I already mentioned, is he's already familiar with Penn State. He's already had success here, and I think that is extremely important. What does concern me additionally is, like I said at the beginning, he's not an offensive minded head guy and he's 50. I don't think 50 is too old. Pretty much just talking about like the 60s to mid 60s would be a little bit older than what I prefer, but I think 50 is totally fine. And then obviously the big game record here. But there's been some ugly losses, but I want to remind people of this. Um, it's tough to beat top ranked teams, especially when you are not even like close to being superior. You don't have the same resources, you don't have the same talent. That is where coaching comes into play. That is a fair response to that. But what I will say is, I think that coaching can only make for so much of a talent gap that I believe that he has had at Duke and when he was at um, Miami. But yeah, it's really tough to win against top teams, and the guys that are really good at it are already on the Georgias and the Alabamas, and it's going to be really tough to get them to leave their current situation. So I look at it as, let's find a younger guy, let's find a guy that is hungry to lead a program, and let let's see what we can do. Let's take a shot. That's ultimately where I'm at with this whole coaching search. But just keep that in mind. It's really tough to win against these big dogs and against the top teams. And like I said, the guys that are doing it consistently are the Kirby Smarts, um, are the Nick Sabans, are the Urban Meyers, and those guys are happy where they're at. So just something to remember. Number four, I have Will Stein. Will Stein, current Oregon offensive coordinator. He was a quarterback at Louisville from 2009 to 2012. The reason I mention that is because we all know, obviously, Oregon's out on the West Coast. So I'm just trying to think of some type of tie that he might have to the East Coast. And why would you leave Oregon and the West Coast to come back to the East Coast? Perfect example. You're from Kentucky. And you are a candidate for a big time coaching job. So just something to keep in mind along this journey is he does have ties to the East Coast. He was hired in Oregon at 2022 as the OC. Before that, he was the co-offensive coordinator and the QB coach at UTSA, where in 2022 the UTSA offense was phenomenal. They were ninth in total offense, 12th in total scoring offense, and 12th in passing offense. They scored 30 plus in 12 of their 13 games and 40 plus in 7 games. His first year at Oregon, an elite offense, second in yards per game, first in passing yards per game. They had 49 passing touchdowns and second in points per game with 44.2. Did take a slight step back in 2024, but again, top 20 in yards per game, points per game, um, and passing yards per game. Something else to look at is the development of the quarterbacks under Will Stein. He has had Bo Nix, Dylan Gabriel, and then we've obviously seen Dante Moore and the success that he has had this season. So clearly, he knows what he's doing from a quarterback standpoint, which is massive for me and for what I'm looking for. And then on top of that, he's just had some other guys on offense um, that have been really solid for him. Jackson Powers Johnson, first round pick, Troy Franklin, and then Bucky Irving. We've all been seeing Bucky Irving um, having just, I know he's injured, but just been having a phenomenal NFL career so far. And then that was 2024. And then in 2025, Josh Connerly Jr., Terrence Ferguson, Dylan Gabriel, Tez Johnson, all draft picks that a lot of us are familiar with. Will does meet three of the four criteria that I was looking for. I'm not really sure as a recruiter. I don't how he is. I don't know the ins and outs as far as who is doing a lot of the recruiting. I would assume as the offensive coordinator that you are playing a big role in recruiting, and Oregon has consistently been putting together top classes um, throughout the recent years, basically. I mean, ever since NIL opened up, they have just been receiving a boatload of money and just putting together some really great classes. Um, he can run an offense at a very high level, as I mentioned when I rattled off some of those stats for you guys. Dylan Gabriel, pretty much a journeyman in college football. He got him drafted in the fourth round. So Dylan Gabriel, not by any means an elite NFL talent, but looked really solid for Oregon last year, and hopefully that's the type of thing that he could bring to Penn State as well. He's young. He's 36 years old. He's had proven success. Oregon has had one of the best offenses in the country since he took over, and he's gotten multiple quarterbacks drafted since he has been on staff at Oregon. My concerns are this. This will go this concern specifically will be for three of the five guys on my list. But it is, what does the transition from offensive coordinator to head coach look like for some of these guys? Because we've all seen it play out before where you are an elite offensive coordinator, or defensive coordinator, but when you take that next step to head coach, it's a different ball game. You have a lot more responsibility. You have to dial in more on recruiting. You have to know. You have to worry about special teams. You have to worry about defense. You have to do a lot more in-game management, and that's a lot more responsibility. And without already having proven success with that piece of it, it's a whole new world. So that is a fair red flag, I believe, in my opinion. Like I said, it's going to be that way for three of the five guys, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with taking a shot on an offensive coordinator. Um, and then the recruiting piece of this, like I said, I would assume that he's a phenomenal recruiter just based off of the recent guys that I've been seeing committing to Oregon, the amount of success that they have had on the field. Um, but yeah, that's another one of my concerns. Guys 3, 2, and 1, I would like to say that the gap between them is very minuscule, and I think that you can make a very strong case for any single one of them to be at number one, at number two, or number three. But at the time of putting this list together, so Kenny Dillingham comes in at three on my list of head coaches. At the time of recording this, he didn't just beat the number seven team in the country. I know that that was a week ago, and he was just in a hard fought battle against Houston this most recent weekend. But I think Kenny Dillingham is a phenomenal head coach and would be a great fit at Penn State. He's proven that he can beat ranked teams, and he's proven that he can put together an elite offense. So some of the background on him is he has been the head coach at Arizona State for this is going to be his third year. So year one, he struggled, which I'm giving him a pass on that because taking Arizona State out of the dumps to where they currently are is just impressive. So first year he struggled. Year two, they won the Big 12. They lost a barn burner to Texas, the number four team in the country, but they beat four ranked teams along the way. And then this year, they are currently they have two losses. I believe they're 5-2. Um, they did just lose to Houston, but prior to that, they put together two back-to-back wins against top 25 teams in Texas Tech and drawing a blank on the other one. I believe it might have been TCU, but don't hold me to that. Either way, two back-to-back wins against ranked teams, um, which is great. Another thing that I want to keep in mind is if he were to be the next head coach of Penn State, that begs the question: does Sam Leavitt come with him, or does he go to the NFL draft? Sam Leavitt has been very solid at Arizona State, and I think that that would be a great addition to Penn State. It would be very nice to um, have a proven quarterback in year one of a new head coach, especially in this with the schedule that Penn State has next year. It's very favorable for the Nittany Lions and that coaching staff. If there was ever to be a year where things might be a little bit easier, at least on paper, it's next year. So that would be a great addition to have those two join the coaching staff in Happy Valley. What concerns me is this: um, how interested is he in the East Coast? He's an Arizona State guy. He graduated from Arizona State. Um, he's been having a lot of success at his alma mater. That tends to be a tough situation to navigate if you're Penn State, where you're no matter who you bring in a head coach, it's going to be a lot of money. But in order to bring in a guy that's having the amount of success at his alma mater that he's having, that check might be a little higher than some of the other guys. And okay, that's fine. Like I said at the beginning of this, they've been investing a ton of money and they're all hands on deck, but it just might be a little bit more difficult to pry a guy like Kenny Dillingham away from Arizona State. Um, my next concern is this type of success sustainable? Going from the Big 12 to the Big 10, different animal. Still quality teams, don't get me wrong, quality clubs, but the Big 10 is a little bit more difficult. And I don't think that's disrespectful or groundbreaking to say. So is he going to be able to carry that same amount of success from the Big 12 to the Big 10 and Penn State? I think that's a fair question. Um, my overall biggest concern here probably is, and this is for any potential head coaching candidate for Penn State, is if they love a guy that is coaching a team that happens to make the let me rephrase it. Will they go after a guy that is going to be coaching a team that is a college football playoff team? And the reason I say this is because, yes, it would be great to have a head coach of a team that's in the playoffs, proven success. That's great. But the timeline for Penn State becomes a lot more narrow and a lot more difficult when you can't announce a head coach until January and or the middle or the end of December, middle of December, because firing your head coach, you're already behind the eight ball on recruiting for 2026 and even 2027. So a guy that's having success like Kenny Dillingham that could potentially be playing in a college football playoff, he's not going to leave his team for for a head coaching job if they're playing for a national if they have a chance to play for a national championship. And if he does, that might be a red flag in its own, where he's just that quick to jump ship on a team like that. So, and for the record, I don't think that Kenny Dillingham would ever do that. I think he's a high class guy. I think he is a high character, very smart head coach that really cares about that program, and I don't think he would ever leave them out to dry for another head coaching job if they are still playing. Number 2 on my list, Buffalo Bills offensive coordinator Joe Brady. This is an interesting one. He's the first and only NFL guy that I've really been seeing brought up in discussions for this head coaching position. He does have ties to Penn State, and he has led a very successful Buffalo Bills offense. So I think those are two things that play into the favor of what I'm looking for. Not necessarily the Penn State thing, but that is important to boosters, alumni, etc. And yeah, I that matters to me too, but that isn't that high up on my list of traits. But yeah, developed has run a successful offense in Buffalo and has developed Josh Allen, helped develop Josh Allen into one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL. He's proven he can run a very balanced offense and aggressive offense in the NFL. And prior to his time in the NFL, he was the wide receiver coach and passing game coordinator for arguably one of the best college football teams of all time, the 2019 LSU Tigers. That LSU Tigers team, for those of you who are unfamiliar, they were 15-0 national champions. One of probably the best college football team ever. Consisted of Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Terrence Marshall Jr., all guys that went to the NFL. Quarterback and 3 wide receivers. Fits exactly what I'm looking for. Came in there, those guys developed. Look at how much success they had in college and how much success they are having in the NFL. What concerns me is coming from college, coming from the NFL back down to college. His name is likely going to come up at some point for head coaching positions because of how great of a job he has done as the OC in Buffalo. And there's a lot less NFL head coaching jobs than there are college football head coaching jobs. So that is something that Penn State would potentially be battling against is where does Joe Brady want to be? Does he want to be an offensive, or does he want to be a head coach in the NFL? Does he want to come back and build Penn State into a national powerhouse? That's for Joe Brady to decide. But the NFL is just a different beast, and when you have NFL owners and front offices reaching out to you for head coaching interviews, that's a tough situation to say no to. So that is a very big concern for me. Next is if he does come back to Penn State, what does the recruiting aspect of it look like? Because when you are in an NFL coaching staff, you don't have to worry about the recruiting piece, obviously, because of free agency. So yeah, I'm sure there are guys that that he looks at that he thinks, oh, this person would be great in my offense, or I think we could develop them and they would be useful for us and they would help us offensively. But that's not the same as talking to recruits and the transfer portal and NIL and all of that. So that's just another separate monster that an offensive coordinator is going to have to deal with if that is the step ultimately that Penn State goes into. And then my last thing, I'm not necessarily worried about this, but I feel like it is a reasonable question to ask, and is Joe Brady having the amount of success that he's been having because his quarterback is Josh Allen, or is Josh Allen having the amount of success that he's having because his offensive coordinator is Joe Brady? And a reasonable, and my opinion on this is, I think it's both. I think Josh Allen is an elite talent, but I think that there was things earlier in his career that he needed to improve on, and the big thing was turning the football over. And I think that Joe Brady has done a great job of kind of reeling that aspect of Josh Allen's game in, but not limiting him to the but not limiting his aggression and playmaking ability offensively. So if somebody were to go out there and ask that, I would say that that's probably my response to it. I think they feed off one another very well. All right, for my number one head coaching option for the Penn State Nittany Lions, it is the Ohio State offensive coordinator, Brian Hartline. He fits everything that I'm looking for. Offensive minded, young guy, elite recruiter, comes from a successful program, fresh off of a national championship. Um, he has been a massive, massive part in the amount of recruiting success that Ohio State has had. He's brought in consistent elite talent on at least on the offensive side of the football. Let me just rattle you off a couple names: Garrett Wilson, Jameson Williams. Jameson Williams didn't even get to play at Ohio State because of how stacked that wide receiver room was. Ended up transferring to Alabama. Um, Justin Fields looked phenomenal in this offense. Julian Fleming, Paris Johnson Jr., Jackson Smith and Jigba, C.J. Stroud, Quinn Ewers, Travion Henderson, Emeka Ibuka, Kyle McCord, Marvin Harrison Jr. The list goes on. Um, just a very, very great list of offensive players to go through Ohio State and eventually play in the NFL. So just daydreaming about the potential of having a guy like him as the head coach and bringing in, he immediately puts you in a position to bring in the best wide receivers, the best quarterbacks, and the best talent offensively in the country if he is your head coach. And the development piece of it is there as well. All of these guys have gone on to play in the NFL, and they've all had tons of success at the college level. So what was the biggest issue for Penn State under James Franklin? I said this at the beginning: quarterback development and wide receiver development. And I think that Brian Hartline has proven that he's done a consistent job of bringing in elite talent, and that's really all there is to it. So, what are my concerns? Um, Again, this is another guy that doesn't have head coaching experience, so I will always be weary of that. But there's also word that Ryan Day is the play caller at Ohio State, and ultimately that doesn't worry me too much because he's still learning from Ryan Day, still learning in-game management, still learning play calling, and I think that when you're around a guy like Ryan Day that's been successful, you begin to pick up on those tendencies and figure out what works, what doesn't, what you like to call, what you don't like to call. So I think that's part of it, and I think just being able to have that freedom and then get your own, put your own spin on it too, I think is all part of being a play caller. So that doesn't necessarily worry me. This isn't a concern for me, but I could see this being a concern for other people, and that is stealing another Ohio State coach. Um, we have been witnessing how the Jim Knowles defense has looked, and although it hasn't necessarily been, um, I'm sure what a lot of people expected, that's not a spot where I am concerned. I think that'll work out, and I think anytime you have an opportunity to bring in a coordinator or a coach from another extremely successful program, that almost feels like a no-brainer. So that doesn't really worry me, but I can see how people would be slightly concerned about that. Um, and just the fact that he's from Ohio State too is, oh, do we really want another guy from the enemy inside inside being part of Penn State? So I can see people saying that, but something to remember is look at the list of guys that the best head coaches have produced and gotten jobs for. So like when I talk about that, I'm talking Nick Saban and Kirby Smart and those types of guys. So this is a list of some of the guys that have coached under Saban, and it's a pretty good list. So Lane Kiffin, Kurt Signetti, Kirby Smart also worked under Saban, Jimbo Fisher, Steve Sarkisian, Dan Lanning, Mario Cristobal. Those are all very well known names within college football and within college sports. And there's been a fair amount of success amongst those coaches. So I feel like anytime you're bringing like I said, bringing a coordinator or a coach from another program, you kind of, I personally like doing that. I think you tend to have a better rate of success because they're around success, they're around greatness, they're around high level elite coaches, and that tends to rub off on you if you're constantly around it and you're constantly in that type of building. So point being is usually the best teams have the best coaches. So just something to keep in mind. And then lastly is, say Ryan Day does move on from Ohio State, whether he wants to go to the NFL or whatever, is Brian Hartline the first name that comes to mind for Ohio State? Is, do they pick up the phone and call him right away and say, hey, why don't we get you back in the building here at Ohio State? We want you to be the head coach. So I don't think Ryan Day's leaving anytime soon, but something else to potentially consider with a guy like Brian Hartline. And I almost think that that's something you kind of have to worry about with, that's the, not worry about, but that's the risk that you run anytime you pluck a coordinator or another coach from that's not a head coach from another university, is if there is an opening for head coach and that coordinator was successful, there's going to be a shot that university ends up calling whoever that coordinator was. So some of these things are less of a concern to me than other people, but at the end of the day, if you have an opportunity to get a guy that checks off all the boxes and and at least my boxes for in Brian Hartline, I think you got to go for it. With that being said, that wraps it up for today. I'm really interested to see how the rest of this pans out. There hasn't been too much information out as far as interviews or what it necessarily looks like for Penn State as far as when we might see the next head coach. But like I said at the beginning of this, if I had to guess, ideal scenario would probably be December. So we got about a month and some change. Enjoy the ride. Try not to go too crazy with what you see on Twitter and whatnot. I mean, we really don't have that much information as of right now on the coaching search, but enjoy the ride. I feel very confident in this athletic department that they're going to find the right guy, and that does it for today's episode. We are.